Chapter 352. The Door 2. The excruciating pain that caused Eugene to clench his teeth gradually became a tad more bearable, and with every throb, the noise echoing within seemed to drift further away. Boom, boom, boom. It was not a comforting sensation by any means. Whether it was a knock to open or shatter, the very act of knocking bore its own agony. Yet Eugene's concentration overshadowed the incredible pain. If he wanted to exploit this primitive method to its fullest, he had to synchronize perfectly with Sienna. This meant that he couldn't be content with merely observing the magic and the flow of mana from Sienna. But instead, Eugene too had to harness the white flame formula in tune with the flow. Slowly, Eugene became submerged in the flow of mana. He had his eyes closed from the very start, but at some point he began to perceive the flickering flames even through his shut eyelids. The flames he saw weren't the characteristic white flames of the white flame formula, but rather the purple hue of his unique flames. Though his eyes remained closed, Eugene fixated on the swaying of the purple flame. Boom boom. With every impact, the flame danced hither and thither. Eugene made sure to continue adjusting the manipulation of the white flame formula in harmony with the flame's waltz. Time became elusive. It always felt this way when deeply engrossed in controlling mana since his previous life. It was impossible to see mana with the naked eye, and without talent, it would take years to even begin to feel mana and even more years to start controlling it. Mana was esoteric and baffling, yet to Eugene it was often kind and straightforward. He excelled at many skills in his past life, but his control over mana had been his most cherished ability. One could easily immerse themselves in what they loved and excelled at. Even if it felt like moments to Eugene, it was often a large span of time. Right now, Eugene could lose himself so deeply in his mana control because he did not need to be mindful of anything other than himself. His trust in Sienna was absolute. Synchronizing and matching the flow with another's mana would be challenging with other arch-wizards, but Sienna was an exception. Sienna could maintain her magic for days as long as Eugene could endure. And should, by some minuscule chance, their synchronization falter and their flows jumble, they had taken impeccable precautions for such mishaps. With the presence of the two saints, Christina and Anise, it would prove challenging for them to die, even if they wanted to. Therefore, Eugene could focus solely on himself with a light heart. He didn't know how many iterations he'd have to endure, but considering his achievement in the white flame formula, the flow of mana, and the current state of his stars, there was a good chance he could attain the 7th star before the expedition departed. In the first place, this plan wasn't impulsively cobbled together. Before arriving in Shimuin during their time at the Lionheart Mansion, they had scrutinized various perspectives, identified challenges, and ultimately derived this method. Hence, both Eugene and Sienna believed that he could break through the current bottleneck in the white flame formula using this strategy. I'm obviously going to do great on my part, and if Sienna does hers. Eugene harbored such thoughts for a fleeting moment. Boom. The distant noise suddenly grew deafeningly loud and close. The shock that had been rumbling within felt as though it would obliterate his very consciousness. Sienna, Eugene thought. A problem had arisen. Could it truly be due to that fleeting distraction? No, that couldn't be it. Eugene's manipulation of mana had been flawless. He had briefly been sidetracked by a stray thought, but his concentration hadn't been so weak as to be disrupted by such a trivial thing. Thus, if there was a fault, it was not Eugene's but Sienna's. It might have been an arrogant assumption, but Eugene was utterly convinced he was not to blame. He was helpless to immediately address the situation, so he turned his attention toward rectifying the mana's distorted flow. However, the issue was more severe than Eugene had anticipated. The flow of mana wasn't merely twisted, he couldn't sense it at all. Had his senses been paralyzed? That seemed too extreme. If the issue had been that severe, he would have either lost consciousness or screamed in pain. Eugene was unable to comprehend his current state. As he first opened his eyes, "What is this?" he muttered without realizing it. He was rendered immobile for a moment from the shock. He had opened his eyes in the mansion's underground room, but now before him stretched an endless sea. How was he to interpret this? Dumbfounded, he remained seated with his jaws agape. He forced himself to dispel his growing sense of panic. Surely Sienna wouldn't play such a prank. Could he be hallucinating from sheer shock? Eugene staggered to his feet while thinking so. But what he saw felt too real to be an illusion. The sea in front of him. No, that wasn't the sea. He belatedly realized what he was seeing. It wasn't the sea but a massive wave. It was a wave so vast and tall that one could only mistake it for the endless ocean. Only the wave was in sight regardless of where he looked. It was a wave so colossal it seemed to touch the heavens. Beyond the wave was only the sea mist approaching with it. But despite the encroaching colossal wave, there was no scent of the unique salty sea breeze. The moment he realized this, he was overcome with an intense, overpowering odor. It was a stench he knew all too well, the smell of blood. It was the stench of innards, rotting corpses, and expelled waste. All such stenches were combined into the nauseating scent of death. And this particular odor was especially vile. Slowly Eugene turned around. Frankly, he had a good idea of what he'd find and was somewhat prepared. The horrendous and putrid smell of death clearly indicated a sea of corpses. He was all too familiar with it. It was reminiscent of the horrific days from 300 years ago. Most of his memories in his past life were those of battlefields. Except for his earliest memories when his parents were alive, and he lived in the small countryside village of Turaz, Eugene, or Hamel as he was known then, had spent almost his entire life on battlefields. Battlefields were always littered with corpses, whether human, elf, dwarf, monster, demon, demonic beast, or any other creature. From a young age, Hamel had witnessed these scenes of death. Any shock from seeing such sights had been left behind in his youth. Yet what he now beheld left him in sheer astonishment. No, he was overwhelmed. It was so far from reality that it seemed like a dream. On one side were waves that were vast beyond comprehension, and on the other side were mountains of corpses as enormous, stretching out like an endless sea. Everywhere he looked, only the deceased met his eyes, so numerous that the rest of the landscape disappeared behind them. "What the hell is this?" Eugene exclaimed, horrified. A hallucination? A nightmare? As Eugene grappled with his disbelief, the inexorable wave continued to approach him. Before the wave could consume everything, a thick fog rolled in, so dense that it even obscured the scent of death. There Eugene stood, paralyzed in the midst. The fog covered the lifeless bodies. The world vanished in the gray haze. But this was not the end. The actual wave that would erase everything had yet to crash down. In this thick, impenetrable fog he could not see the wave, but he could sense its slow approach. A primal and ominous dread gripped Eugene. He had experienced such a feeling long ago. It was reminiscent of an entity so vague he had not even clearly seen it. A mere glimpse from the corner of his vision had been enough to make him realize what despair was. Rumbly. Before the wave struck, he heard the sound of something breaking and crumbling. Enveloped by the dense fog, it felt as if his body, his very consciousness, was plummeting into the abyss. And then he was completely devoured by the darkness. Eugene. Hamel. He couldn't grasp the situation. Eugene tried to focus while blinking several times. He saw Sienna and Anise looking down at him with wide, worried eyes. What? His voice quivered as he tried to speak. As soon as he uttered a sound, Anise rushed to embrace him, her hands trembling as she touched him. What on earth? Are you truly all right, Eugene? Christina, having stepped forward, choked up. Sienna, who had missed her chance to act, blinked several times in confusion and then, albeit belatedly, nudged herself beside Christina. What happened? Feel all right, I guess, Eugene muttered, dazed. His mind was still in turmoil, struggling to grasp the situation. Lying almost beneath the two women, Eugene began checking himself for injuries. There was no evident harm. His core was intact and his veins weren't twisted. The only pain was on his cheeks. But it wasn't hard to guess. While unconscious, it seemed Sienna or Anise had slapped him a few times. I should be the one asking. What just happened? Eugene asked while squirming beneath the two bodies. Christina swiftly rose and shot a glance at Sienna. Was it your mistake, Lady Sienna? Said Christina. Look here, kid. What do you take me for? I swear to the gods I made no mistake, retorted Sienna. You don't even believe in gods, do you? Said Christina. Well, that might be true, but I genuinely didn't make any mistakes. If there was one, it wasn't mine but Eugene's, explained Sienna. I didn't mess up either, Eugene muttered while sitting up. If neither of us messed up, then what happened? Did anything strange happen? Strange happening? Yes, there was. Sienna affirmed as she pointed to Eugene's left hand. When he looked to check what she was pointing at, he saw dried blood on his hand. Blood was splattered on Agarotha's ring. The ring was pulsing red. Was it not your doing, Sienna? Me? Why would I? Said Eugene. The ring's power heals you, doesn't it? For an unknown reason, a mishap occurred while Eugene and Sienna were synchronizing their mana flow. As such, something happened inside Eugene, which was why he had invoked Agarotha's ring. At least that's what Sienna, Christina, and Anise believed. Yet Eugene had not summoned the ring's power. Though at times the ring had augmented his divine power without beckoning, it was merely to bolster. The ring had never activated its power of its own volition. It couldn't be because I cleaned the ring, right? This fleeting thought surfaced within Eugene's mind. That was completely ridiculous. With a scowl, Eugene fixed his gaze on the ring. He concentrated on the ring, but no oddities presented themselves. After a brief scrutiny, Eugene impulsively sliced the palm of his left hand. Sienna and Christina remained unfazed by the sight. Since Eugene had recovered, the two were capable of making rational judgments. With the two women's gazes on him, Eugene summoned the ring's power. It was a mere scratch on his palm. The energy expended to heal was but trivial. Agarotha's ring fed on a scant bit of Eugene's life and swiftly mended the wound. Then it was over. Eugene became lost in thought. He clenched and unclenched his fist. What was it? Eugene wondered as he tried to search for possible explanations. Did the recurrent shocks unknowingly activate the ring's power? Such a notion was hard to swallow. The ring's invocation wasn't novel to him. When facing dire perils in the battle against Raizakia, he had not seen the same illusion when he used Agarotha's ring. Was it because he cleaned the ring meticulously? Impossible. With a sardonic smirk, Eugene smeared blood onto the ring. Yet no anomaly ensued. He tilted the ring-adorned hand before wiping off the dried blood. Still nothing transpired. In this country, in these waters, myths of Agaroth persist. Eugene thought back to what Gundor had told him. It could well be the only place where legends of Agaroth still remained. Did he have to ponder upon the ring's antics in this light? Agaroth is a name unfamiliar to me, voiced Christina in response to his pondering. Most ancient gods have not left their names in this age. According to the theology of Uruz, the very first being called a god in this world was the god of light. Those born from the luminescence he radiated are but his progeny. In a distant past, an era devoid of the demon king, where demons, beasts, and monsters were indistinguishable, all such beings had been merely termed monsters. The god of light had descended during such a time. Humans feared the monsters, those born from and accompanied by the darkness. Thus, the god of light bestowed upon them a brilliance to dispel the shadows. He graced the humans with the luminance of the flames. By the divine descent of the god of light, mankind was granted life in the world. Only the god of light had descended from the heavens. All other deities had been birthed on the ground in the world illuminated by the god of light. In the theology of Uruz, Agaroth would be such a being. Not a deity descended from the heavens, but one birthed from the world bathed in light. Most of these beings arise from the worship of men, explained Christina. To the followers of Uruz, the god of light was the one true deity. They dismissed other gods as mere fabrications, idols of worship set up by primitive ancients to end truth. Even Uruz wasn't entirely above such accusations. Ages past, the disciples of the light had been so obsessed with a tangible object of worship that they used the remains of the holy emperor to forge a false idol. Uruz had been preoccupied with fabricated divinities. It was a necessity during those times, Christina remarked with a cynical smile. In that distant age, humans first became aware of the entity we call God. Everyone yearned to worship such an existence, to call someone a deity. After the god of light, countless other deities graced the world, though many didn't leave their names in the annals of time. It's uncertain whether Agaroth truly was an entity worthy of the title God. How do we address the demise of such an entity from the mythic ages? We can't fully interpret events from such bygone times. But Sir Eugene, in faith, what matters most is not the existence of a god but belief itself, she explained. Christina and Anise were such entities. The saint wasn't a product of divine intervention, but false gods birthed from human desire. Although they were made entirely by human hands, merely the label of saint allowed them to lead countless believers to trust in the existence of their god. The ring you possess, Sir Eugene, is a divine artifact of Ogoroth. And myths of Ogoroth persist in these seas. Perhaps somewhere in these waters, the heartbeat of faith in Ogoroth continues, Christina suggested. So the ring reacted because of that? Asked Eugene. I can't be certain. Or maybe... Christina hesitated, wary of her words. It could be a revelation, Anise interjected. She gazed intently at the ring on Eugene's finger with squinted eyes. While the god of light rarely bestowed direct revelations. Hamel. That ring is a divine artifact of the ancient war god Ogoroth, right? And has its divine power not aided you in the past? If so, perhaps Ogoroth holds you in particular esteem. So Ogoroth sent a revelation to me? Eugene asked skeptically. It's all in the interpretation. As Christina mentioned, in religion what's important is faith. There's a reason the leaders of false faiths obsess over idolizing themselves. That's probably why there were so many gods in the past, Anise commented. With a suspicious look, Eugene eyed the ring on his finger. Was Ogoroth a deity who descended from the heavens? According to the theology of Uruz, only the god of light descended from the sky. But honestly, that tale is hard to believe, Anise stated calmly. It was something no other believer would dare state. You know as well as I that the teachings of Uruz, the Church of the God of Light, have been twisted and perverted to the extreme. Perhaps there were multiple gods who descended, and Ogoroth might have been one among them. If such an entity exists, it might send revelations too, though the meaning of such a revelation remains elusive, Anise mused. Eugene concentrated on the vision he had witnessed earlier, the engulfing sea mists and the countless corpses. A recollection surged within him, a vision he saw in the darkness. He had seen the image in the dark room. The first had been of a battlefield littered with bodies as common as trash. A man, face obscured, had been staggering across it, shoulders sagging with despair as he moved towards a distant horizon. Then he had seen mountains of stacked corpses and, atop it, a seated man with a blood-soaked greatsword resting on his shoulder. Was that also a revelation? Eugene pondered while playing with the ring. When he had entered the dark room, he had left Ogoroth's ring behind. However, besides that, he had always worn the ring. A ring on the left ring finger had historically signified various things like contracts, unions, and promises. From the moment Eugene first put the ring on that finger and fed it his blood, one could say he had formed a pact with Ogoroth. If we're so connected, I should be able to receive revelations, even without wearing the ring, he thought. Or perhaps, I saw a fragment of Ogoroth's memories. Eugene clenched his fist with a scowl. Let's try it again. What? Anise exclaimed. Hamel, have you lost your mind? If I'm uncertain, I need to try once more, Eugene grumbled while standing tall with determination. Chapter 353, The Door 3. Eugene made several more attempts afterward, but he did not come to see another phantom. Even after making several changes to his attempts, he bore no fruit. He increased the intensity with which he knocked against his core and made a purposeful attempt to be conscious of Ogoroth's ring. Nothing happened. Revelations are strictly the will of the gods. No matter how fervently a human prays, the gods do not always respond, Anise explained. Doesn't the god of light offer any advice? Eugene asked, exasperated. Do you really think that stoic deity would offer counsel on such matters? 300 years ago, even in my most desperate moment in the battle against the demon king of incarceration, the god of light offered no guidance. Anise grinned while staring intently at Eugene's face. The most desperate moment. Was it truly the battle against the demon king of incarceration? Or was it perhaps? Eugene had two possibilities in mind, but he refrained from asking Anise. Given Anise's smirk, the answer was quite obvious. And that apparent answer invoked fear and guilt within Eugene. Ahem. He cleared his throat before continuing. Isn't it a bit harsh that even an angel like you can't communicate with the gods? I might be called an angel, but I'm no different from a ghost. The only distinction might be that I can spread my wings and emit light. Anise retorted with a bitter laugh. It was true she had become an angel in death. But that didn't mean she had met the god of light directly. Yet she certainly felt the presence of a god. The revelations Christina received, as well as the appointment of Eugene Lionheart as the hero, were definitely aligned with the will of the god of light. So that's when it started, Eugene thought, his face scrunched in contemplation as he settled into his seat. If Christina hadn't claimed it was a revelation and taken Eugene with her back then, if he hadn't ventured into Vermouth's tomb with Doynes and Gilead to open the coffin, and if the God of Light hadn't sent that revelation, would they have really checked Vermouth's coffin? We would have eventually, Eugene surmised. He had always harbored strong doubts about Vermouth's death. No matter how much he contemplated, he couldn't imagine that Vermouth simply died of old age. But though he was curious, he wouldn't have checked any time soon. After all, Eugene had not been in a place to act freely within the Black Lion Castle at the time. "Are you still at it?" Seal asked while entering the underground chamber. She shuddered involuntarily after glancing at Eugene sitting in the room's center. Flames. Violet flames enveloped Eugene's body. These silent, burning flames of mana rose past Eugene's head and danced toward the ceiling. There was no heat, but the sheer force the flames emitted was overwhelming. "What is that?" Seal wondered. She knew what was happening in this room. She hadn't visited daily, not wanting to disturb his meditation, but a few days prior she had come down to listen to Eugene's request. The flames had certainly been intense at that time, but not nearly as overwhelmingly powerful as now. Seal caught sight of Eugene with her mouth half open but quickly composed her expression before taking a step forward. "Has your white flame formula reached 7 stars?" she inquired. "Not yet," Eugene answered. "Not yet." Seal was baffled even further by his response. The quality of the mana he emitted had risen glaringly compared to a few days before, and the force of his flames had magnified. Yet he still wasn't at 7 stars? "I've almost broken through, but it hasn't formed a new star yet," Eugene explained. He was certain he would have 7 stars by tonight or tomorrow at the latest. "Still, I'll have it done before we set sail," Eugene thought, relieved. The only reason he could use such a method now was due to the complexity of Eugene's white flame formula. This was the last time he'd be able to boost the white flame formula in such a way. There wouldn't be another shortcut in the future. For now. "I checked the library, but there's scarce literature on the ancient gods. The few that exist scarcely mention Agaroth." Saying so, Seal took a seat in front of Eugene before continuing with her report. "I met with an expert in the field. One of the most renowned scholars who studies the folk religions of Shimuan. The god of war. No matter how one worded it, war was ultimately about killing and conquest. In that regard, Agaroth was an excellent slayer and conqueror. His very existence was war, and even his name embodied it. Why Agaroth waged such wars and obsessed over them was beyond understanding in this age. But one thing was clear. Even amidst the tumultuous ancient times, Agaroth was among the few gods known for his brutality, always enveloped in the scent of blood. He had been a deity filled with madness. According to the scholar, Agaroth was a great conqueror. He never settled in one place and spent most of his life wandering," continued Seal. "Whenever one war ended, he ignited another." Eugene recalled the visions of battlefields filled with corpses he had seen in the dark room. The more he heard and learned, the more he became convinced that the scenes he witnessed were related to Agaroth. "Did you hear anything about Agaroth's sacred ground somewhere in the South Seas?" asked Eugene. "There's talk of it being somewhere across the distant sea, but its exact location remains unknown. There are rare archaeological discoveries on the uninhabited islands there, but nothing of significant value," responded Seal. Eugene stared intently at the ring of Agaroth on his left ring finger. If only he could receive another revelation like before. But unfortunately, Agaroth gave no further visions. He pondered over the nature of Agaroth's ring. The first time the ring acted on its own was at the Fount of Light. The next had been in Ruhr when it lunged at Gavid Lindman. It was when he used the Holy Sword. Eugene reflected on the emotions he felt at that moment. Rage, hatred, murderous intent. All were forms of madness that raged in wartime. Eugene did not despise those emotions. Rather, he was all too familiar with such feelings. "They're necessary," Eugene concluded. He had pondered casting the ring aside entirely, but there was no denying the boon it had granted him in dire times. Nor was there any guarantee that there wouldn't be more of such moments to come. "I gained the ring by chance." Eugene contemplated everything he knew about the ring. The reason Ariardel had gifted him the Ring of Agaroth was in hopes that it would aid in Eugene's journey. Eugene had not found any need for any other armament, having already possessed various weapons from the Lionheart clan, those that had previously belonged to Vermouth. Thus he had opted for the Ring of Ogoroth. Even Eugene had to agree it had been an impeccable choice. He found greater allure in this ring. It could potentially stave off death, and it was infinitely better than some cumbersome armor that would only hamper his movement. It was definitely possible that he had acquired the ring by chance. But perhaps it was destined, Eugene thought. The vast, distant seas or Roguyaran, both represented the same enigma, a realm beyond human reach. What truly lay beyond no one knew. Would they be filled with monsters like the Nur, who gave off the same enigmatic feeling as the Demon King of Destruction? Why were these countless creatures seeking to leave their domain, transcending boundaries to lay waste to this world? Eugene clenched his hand. Legends spoke of Agorotha's sacred ground at the end of the southern seas. Eugene possessed Agorotha's relic and he had received visions. Perhaps he could journey there one day. No, he would need to head there one day. Days before setting sail, a line of colossal ships docked at the shores of Shettar. Even with the swiftest winds, a journey to the waters of Salgalta would take months. Advanced magic had revolutionized trade, negating the need for large vessels for cargo. But magic couldn't entirely defy the laws of nature, especially when it concerned living beings. Supplies for months-long journey could be magically compacted into smaller spaces. However, such wasn't the case for humans. Recklessly expanding space for habitation and encountering an issue mid-journey? Spatial magic concerning living beings always held the potential for catastrophe, demanding cautious and stringent handling. Thus, the ships were vast, a necessity when ferrying hundreds of lives. Most ships flew the same banner, an eagle spreading its wings above the waves, a symbol of the Shimuan royal family. "The kingdom sure loves their eagles," a voice murmured nearby. "Look, the banner of Aroth is similar." "Not all eagles are the same. Arotha's emblem has the eagle clutching a staff in its talons," Sienna countered. "Still, all just eagles at the end of the day." "The symbol of Kiel is a dragon," Seal interjected with a smirk. "Are you trying to boast about it being an empire? Well, I guess a dragon would be stronger than an eagle. It's bigger. They can fly higher and wield magic as well," Sienna grumbled, turning her gaze upwards. Though most ships sported the royal banners, a few had different ensigns. Especially notable was a ship flying a banner with the depiction of a sword, spear and arrow, a vessel that stood just as imposingly as the royal warships. "That belongs to the mercenary king Ivik Slad," Carmen informed. She cocked her head, eyes following the figurehead of a ship adorned with a dragon. Upon it stood a man. "That man there is Ivik." Carmen pointed him out. He had short golden locks and a dewy complexion. He wasn't an immense hulk of a man like Molan, Ivatar or Gargith. But slung across Ivik's back was a bow as large as any weapon carried by the bulkier warriors. Sword, spear and bow. Those are Ivik's weapons of choice. I once crossed blades with him briefly. "He's not one to be taken lightly," said Carmen. "Well, isn't he considered the second best warrior in Shimuan?" Eugene mused, eyes narrowing as he observed Ivik from a distance. The honor of being Shimuan's strongest belonged to Ortis, the commander of the Violent Tide Knights. The runner-up or the second strongest was Ivik. He is the second-ranked, but, in some ways he's even trickier to deal with than Ortis. The title of the first-ranked in Shimuan is typically reserved for direct descendants of the royal line, so Ivik, being a mercenary, could never attain it, Carmen explained. "So, you're suggesting Ivik might be more skilled than Lord Ortis?" Eugene inquired. "It's hard to say. They've never truly fought with the intent to kill one another. But from my experience fighting both. Well, if Ivik were to put some distance between us and start firing that bow with lethal intent, I'd find him a tad more challenging." After a brief pause, Carmen hastily added, "That's not to say he's stronger than me, just trickier. The Blood Lion." "Lady Carmen, you shouldn't refer to him that way now," interjected Desra, cutting off Carmen's words. Carmen hesitated, emitting a slight groan. To think that she, Carmen Lionheart, one of the three who had reached 7 stars of the White Flame formula, would have to see the Blood Lion as such was. Carmen sounded almost strangled. Eugene's expression shifted to one of discomfort. Every twitch of his cheek made him more aware of the thick layer of makeup applied to his face, further igniting his agitation. What on earth was this spectacle? Hush, Yuri, don't clench your fist so hard. The muscles you've worked so hard to build might just burst. Lady Yuri, please restrain your anger. Many eyes are upon this place. Though they are distant, some might have keen enough senses to detect your fury and grow suspicious. Sienna and Christina whispered at his side. You must be aware of your current state, Yuri. You're wearing women's makeup and dressed in a woman's attire. What if you can't contain yourself and explode here? All these people might realize you're in disguise. Seal whispered with a grin that suggested she found the situation vastly amusing. This is all your fault. Eugene shot back. I might have asked, but you chose to comply, Yuri. If you were a tad less kind-hearted, you wouldn't have agreed to such a ridiculous request. Seal turned away, her smile still in place. Well, it's too late to back out now, right? Just keep it together until we board the ship, okay? Once we're aboard, you won't have to go out. Yuri took deep breaths, trying to calm herself. Right, just until they boarded the ship. And indeed, there were so many onlookers right now. The mere news of a mission to subdue the troublesome pirate empress was enough to excite the townspeople. Add to that a grand send-off for the task force and a crowd was inevitable. They're all staring so intently. The gazes of those who had already boarded the ship were especially intense, much like Ivik's. And why wouldn't they be? There was Seal, who had achieved so much at such a young age, and Carmen, known to be the strongest in Lionheart. Even though their numbers were few, just the names Carmen, Seal, and Lionheart were enough to draw all eyes to them. Such intense scrutiny called for caution. Yuri was careful with every step, every gesture. She intentionally avoided making eye contact with anyone. Thankfully, she was allowed to keep her head down. For now, Yuri, Sienna, and Christina were in disguise as servants of the Lionheart family. Chapter 354, Ivik 1. This reminds me of the old days, Sienna said, her lips set in a straight line as she turned to look at their surroundings. Boarding a large vessel like this one and being sent off with such a grand display, almost like it was a celebration. This all reminded her of their past from 300 years ago. In fact, things weren't all that similar. At that time, when Sienna had just met Hamel and they were setting sail for Helmuth together, the ship everyone had been riding on was much shabbier than the one they were on now. Such a large fleet was being mobilized to subdue a single dark elf, Iris. But when the hero Vermouth and his companions had set sail for Helmuth 300 years ago, the ships that had left with them had numbered less than 10. It couldn't be helped. At that time, no other ships in the port city were willing to set sail for Helmuth. After all, how could there be so many people with a death wish willing to take part in a journey where the most likely outcome would be them all dying horribly? However, just by leading the vanguard, the hero Vermouth managed to turn the tide of the war. Even back then, 300 years ago, countless people were just waiting for someone to give them a push on the back or drag them forward, holding their hands. Let's head inside, Eugene suggested in a lowered voice. Even after listening to himself speak in his magically altered voice several times now, he still couldn't get used to it. The fact that he had to be so careful with his mannerisms also made Eugene steam up inside. If it were possible, he would much rather lock himself in his room and not come out until they had reached the Salgarda Sea. The fortunate thing was that the ship Eugene and the others were currently on had actually been set aside for the Lionheart's exclusive use. There might be many other sailors and soldiers on board, but all of them looked to the Lionhearts, Carmen and Seal, that is, for orders. This was a consideration given by Ortis, who was serving as the commander of the subjugation force. In fact, Ortis would also have found it awkward to ride on the same ship as Carmen. While it was true that Ortis was the commander-in-chief, that didn't mean Ortis was in any position to give Carmen orders. What's so great about riding on the same ship as a royal? Seal said with a snort as she turned her head dismissively. The flagship sailing at the head of the fleet had the emblem of Shimuan's royal family embroidered into its sails in a display of majesty and prestige. With dwarven hands shaping everything from its design to construction, this was Shimuan's strongest warship, the Laversia. In addition to Ortis, 2 other members of Shimuan's royal family were currently riding that ship. They were Scalia Animus, the vice-commander of the Violent Tide Knights, also known as the Princess Knight, and her half-brother, Jaffer Animus. I can understand why Princess Scalia, as a member of the Violent Tide Knights, is coming along, but why did they bring a prince as well? Eugene asked. To earn some prestige, Seal replied in a tone that suggested the answer was obvious. As you may already know, Princess Scalia had been held up as the mascot of the royal family. After all, this country so boastfully touts itself to be the land of knights. Shimuan's royal family was obsessed with their country's nickname, the Land of Knights. The countless colosseums that existed within this kingdom, as well as the numerous policies that favored knights errant and mercenaries, were all designed to spread that nickname. However, those alone weren't enough. In order to truly be called the Land of Knights, the royal family itself needed to be known for its knights. As a result, Princess Scalia had been carefully cultivated into a mascot that the royal family could use to appeal to the public. This princess puts too much effort into living up to the expectations of those around her. She trains diligently and goes without sleep, but her level of skill is honestly just average. It's not bad enough to be called terrible, but it's also not good enough to justify being called the Princess Knight. That was what Noir, the queen of the night demons, had said with a giggle after stealing control of Scalia's body. It was an accurate assessment of the princess. Scalia had shown some talent for the sword from an early age, but even that wasn't exceptional enough to justify her receiving such unanimous acclaim. Even so, the royal family had forcefully placed Princess Scalia in such a position. They had made her the vice-commander of the Violent Tide Knights, one of the knightly orders that were always brought up when discussing the question of who were the strongest knights on the continent. In fact, Princess Scalia is actually quite far down the line of succession for the throne. However, Prince Jafar is a different matter. He's third in line for the succession, giving him more than enough grounds to aim for the throne, Seal explained, her brows furrowing as she talked about Prince Jafar. While observing Eugene's expression, Seal cleared her throat slightly and continued, "The crown might be within his reach, but it will still take a lot of effort for the third in line to ascend to the throne. Efforts such as hiding behind his sister while tagging along on a subjugation mission with a guaranteed chance of victory, or else, marriage to a young lady from a prestigious foreign clan." Marriage? At this word, Eugene narrowed his eyes and turned to look at Seal. It was already obvious why Seal was bringing up this topic now, but Eugene wanted to hear the full details. Seal paused to clear her throat once more. Ahem. Well, as you should already be aware, the Lionheart clan's name holds an extreme significance that has nothing to do with the strength that the clan also possesses. Enough to attract the interest of a prince from the Land of Knights. But you definitely have no intention of accepting his interest, Eugene bluntly stated. Seal pouted. You can be really cold at times, you know that? Like right now, for instance. Sienna and Christina were honestly concerned that Seal might burst into tears once more, but fortunately, Seal didn't tear up. Instead, she just furrowed her brow and kicked Eugene in the thigh. Definitely? Even though you said that you definitely don't see me in that way, you still act like you know everything about me, Seal complained. When did I ever do that? Eugene denied. Seal huffed. Well, in any case, of course I don't. I have no interest in Prince Jafar whatsoever. He has sent me several letters asking me out for a cup of tea, but I've ignored them all. So that's why he's glaring at us like that? Eugene grumbled in a low voice. And don't you know that you should be more careful? Kicking someone right out in the open where other people can see you. Is it really okay if the noble White Rose gets caught doing something like that? You're being so annoying, Seal complained, even as she raised her head to look over with a puzzled expression. Indeed, it was just as Eugene had said. A blatant gaze could be felt being directed at them from the flagship Laversia. Two people could be seen standing at the aft of the ship. A man and a woman, both with red hair. The man had a beard that didn't really suit him and was wearing an equally ill-fitting suit of armor. This man was probably Prince Jafar. As for the woman standing next to him, Eugene already knew who she was. It was Scalia Animus. When they met in Roer, she had black circles under her eyes due to suffering from insomnia, but her complexion looked better now than it had back then. However, from the dullness of her eyes, she still didn't look all that healthy. Eugene recalled the sight of Scalia decapitating a corpse's head. I'm not attacking this princess, instead I'm helping her. Even though she can't help her true nature. Princess Scalia had slaughtered the mercenaries in the snowfield because she had been driven mad by the nightmares that Noir had shown her. To Scalia's eyes at that time, the mercenaries had looked like villains who deserved death. However, the punishment that Scalia administered was still too severe. She had slaughtered them all while shouting about how she was delivering punishment on these dirty filths. That might have something to do with the true nature that Noir had spoken of. But why is Princess Scalia also glaring this way? Eugene asked. Because she hates the lion hearts, Seal muttered with a snort. Also, she hates me as well. Eugene blinked. Why? Haven't I already said it? Seal smirked. The Lionheart name possesses immense significance. Although Princess Scalia may be far from the throne, what if she had become engaged to Cyan, who has been confirmed as the next patriarch? The princess herself may not have been able to ascend to the throne even with that, but for the royal family, it can't help but be a huge disappointment that her engagement to Cyan fell through. There had been two people in the discussion for Cyan's potential fiancé: Shimuan's Princess Scalia and the Ruhr Kingdom's Princess Isla. However, since Princess Isla was currently only 11 years old, it had virtually been confirmed that Cyan was to be betrothed to Princess Scalia. If they hadn't met Princess Scalia in the snowfield on their way to the night march, that is. And if they hadn't seen how she had been driven crazy from her nightmares and staged such a massacre. Who cares what she wants? Seal whispered. Apart from what we saw with you back then, do you know just how much my brother and I were offended when she used her status as a princess to act so condescending towards us? That's why Cyan decided to change the target of his betrothal. In the first place, they weren't even officially engaged. They were just in the process of talks. Eugene decided to move on. And what's the reason she hates you? Are you really asking because you don't know the answer already? You should be able to roughly tell just how famous I've become in Shimuan over the past year. They do call me the undefeated White Rose after all. On top of the fact that I'm higher in the rankings than Princess Scalia, there's the difference between our performance during our matches and well, Seal hesitated for a moment, seeming a bit embarrassed at having to say this herself, but she soon got hold of her expression and finished with a smug smile. Our appearances. Eugene just stayed silent. Go ahead and just try to refute it, Seal challenged. What do you think? Between me and Princess Scalia, who's prettier? Do I really need to answer that? Eugene questioned. Seal returned his question with another. What if I really want to hear your answer, though? You're prettier, I guess, Eugene admitted with a deep sigh. These words made Seal happy enough that she felt like she was floating, but she did her best to hide any changes in her expression. Instead, she pretended to laugh arrogantly. Isn't the sea breeze kind of cold? Sienna, who had been watching Seal as if spectating a child's performance, suddenly spoke up. Although the child's performance had certainly been cute, Sienna felt she couldn't just allow Seal to continue her solo act precisely because of that. After all, there's still a pecking order when it comes to these things. 1. Although Eugene had said he couldn't see her that way, was there really a tree in this world that wouldn't be felled after being chopped 10 times? So what would happen if Sienna allowed the 21-year-old fresh-faced Seal to actively use her current position to start chopping her way into Eugene's heart? Sienna was afraid of this possibility and believed there was a need to be wary of this young, hot-blooded axewoman. As such, Sienna subtly sent a glance towards Christina, who was standing beside her. That's right, she still had Christina and a niece, and in Sienna's opinion, these two were her firm allies. The two-in-one saints who at times showed the craftiness of the elderly and at other times showed their youthful energy. So Sienna intended to join hands with the saint and form a strong barrier that would block Seal's axe swings. However, Christina's reaction was completely different from Sienna's expectations. She didn't seem to feel any wariness towards Seal, instead showing a bright smile. Those weren't the eyes of someone looking at a child showing off. Right now, Christina was purely cheering for Seal. Unable to guess the reason why that might be, Sienna tilted her head in confusion. Soon she came to a fearful and terrifying conjecture. The 23-year-old Christina and the 21-year-old Seal must have joined hands already. As for that snake-like Anise, who had survived until now by transforming into an angel after dying at the end of her natural lifespan 300 years ago, she would always hide behind Christina whenever Sienna was being teased for her advanced age. So, in the face of this alliance of 20-year-olds, Sienna would surely be left completely isolated. Whoosh. Right at the moment when Sienna was about to vent her anger at being placed in such a position, someone dropped onto the deck with a gust of wind. Carmen, who had been leaning against the railing, straightened herself and greeted the intruder by name, Ivik. This was the man who was known as the Mercenary King. Rising from his crouch, Ivik turned his head towards Carmen. Eugene had quite an interest in Ivik. The reason for that was simple. It was because of Ivik's nickname as the Mercenary King. It reminds me of the past, Eugene thought. 300 years ago, before becoming Vermouth's comrade, Hamel was originally a mercenary. He wasn't just any mercenary too, but an exceptionally famous mercenary. Even in that terrible era, he could still name a high price for his services, and he was proud of the fact that he always delivered a job well beyond what he had charged for. Of course, he wasn't just famous in a good way. Before his manners had been cleaned up by Anise, Hamel really did have a filthy personality, and he was especially cruel when it came to dealing with the other mercenaries in the same industry as himself. But that couldn't be helped. Hamel had suffered too many bad turns during his work as a mercenary. He had, of course, been betrayed many times, but when he was younger, there had even been times when the chastity of his ass had been in danger. As such, even though Hamel was a mercenary, he hated other mercenaries. However, I was still very respected as a mercenary, Eugene recalled smugly. Although it might sound strange, Eugene, or rather Hamel, didn't feel much shame for praising himself like this. Hamel was definitely a legendary mercenary. If you set aside his shitty personality and just looked at his achievements, no one could deny his status as a legendary mercenary. From a mercenary who dominated the battlefield, he became the hero's comrade, and he had even helped to slay 3 demon kings. If someone like that couldn't be called legendary or a king of mercenaries, then who the hell could? He should definitely respect Hamel, Eugene thought as he examined Ivik. When even the patriarch of the prestigious Lionheart clan respected Hamel more than his own ancestor, there was no way that a man who was called the Mercenary King wouldn't revere Hamel. Though there's no way I can ask him that when I'm dressed like this, Eugene thought regretfully. But first of all, why had Ivik come here? Eugene leaned over slightly to hide himself behind Seal's back. Although his disguise as a woman was almost perfect, if it was a master at Ivik's level, he might be able to see through the flaws that remained in Eugene's form. Ivik strode over to them. Carmen bit down on her cigar with an exasperated look and reached into a pocket of her coat. She stepped forward in front of the group as if to stop Ivik from approaching any closer. It was Ivik who made the first move. He stretched out one hand as if to offer a handshake, and then in the next instant he had drawn his sword. The sword slash that curved upwards from his waist flew towards Carmen's throat. Carmen responded without the slightest panic. Her casually outstretched hand parried the blade while her other hand shot at Ivik's Adam's apple. Her attack didn't land. This was because the moment his blade had been parried, Ivik took a step back without hesitation. "You're as good as ever, big sis," Ivik complimented. Carmen sighed. "And you're as rude as ever, Ivik." Ivik had a sly grin on his face. Looking at Seal and Desra standing behind Carmen, he winked. "It's been a while since we've last met, young ladies from the Lionheart clan. How have you been?" Ivik politely asked. "All right," Seal casually responded. Desra was more polite. "It's been a long time, Sir Ivik." Ivik turned to Carmen. "You're being a little too strict with them, big sis. After all, there shouldn't be any reason for you to bring these young ones along with us on such a dangerous mission." "A lion will push its cubs off a cliff," Carmen said after resting her cigar between her fingers. The moment she said this, Carmen flinched and turned to look in Eugene's direction. She recalled that she had said those same words to Eugene in the past, only to be pointed out that she was wrong. "Ivik, do you know something? In fact, lions don't actually push their cubs off cliffs," Carmen declared proudly. Ivik was taken aback. "What?" However, for a lion to grow into its full potential as a lion, it must overcome many hardships from a young age. So to raise these two into excellent lions, I am deliberately subjecting them to hardship. "Oh, as expected of you, big sis," Ivik said with an uncertain look as he nodded. Carmen asked, "So then, Ivik, why have you come onto our ship? Judging from how you were posing earlier and showing off, are you just looking for some praise?" Ivik attempted to deny this. "What on earth are you saying, big sis? It would look a bit more impressive if you were at least wearing a cloak," Carmen critiqued. "No, it feels like there's been some kind of misunderstanding, but I really wasn't trying to pose or show off to you, big sis," Ivik insisted. "But you were definitely holding a pose to show off to someone, weren't you?" Carmen accused. "I was actually trying to show off to my fans who have come to see us off," Ivik finally admitted. "As young Lady Seal may already be aware, if you want to make a living in this country as a fighter, your fan base is just as important as your skills." While sheathing his drawn sword back into its scabbard, Ivik muttered in a low voice, The other reason why I've come here, big sis, is that I want to talk to you about Iris. Carmen raised an eyebrow. Is it something to do with the subjugation force? So, is that really something that you should be discussing with me? The commander of the subjugation force is Lord Ortis. Haha. I'm afraid that I don't really get along with Lord Ortis. Ivis glanced at Laversia in the distance before continuing to speak. I also suspect that he might be scheming something. Especially since someone like me makes Lord Ortis uncomfortable in several different senses of the word. Carmen pondered this for a moment. Alright, I'll accept that for now. Then let's go inside and have a talk. However, Ivik, what exactly can you tell me about Iris? There are many things I can tell you about her, Ivik said with a grin before turning his head slightly to look behind Seal. By the way, who are those pretty young women? Pretty young women. These words caused Eugene's cheeks to tremble unconsciously.